The wind carried the scent of winter early that year, though October had only just begun. Out near the Wyoming range, where the sky opened wide as a prayer and the land bore the scars of harsh seasons, the town of Elkhorn was a breath held between storms. Folks had begun bringing in their stock, mending their roofs, sealing windows with oilcloth and hope. Snow would come fast and stay long. Jonah's cutter stood on the porch of the Half Moon Ranch, fingers wrapped around a tin mug gone cold. His beard, streaked with ash and rust, moved faintly in the wind. He watched the far hills with a hunter's eye, but there was nothing left to track this morning. Just the memory of a fire that had gutted the bunkhouse last spring and taken his best cook with it. Folks said he was cursed, one fire after another. 2 men lost last year to a fever no one could name, and now the ranch's rhythm was thrown off. The hands ate whatever could be boiled in a pot or slapped on bread. Morale was thinning like soup stock. It was Sam Dawley, the blacksmith, who mentioned her name. "Woman out near Fort Bridge," Sam had said, bent over a wagon wheel, sweat darkening his shirt. "Widow, quiet sort, cooks like she's praying." Jonas didn't ask what that meant, just jotted the name down in his pocket ledger and rode out 3 days later. She lived in a sod-roofed house beside a stream, fenced in with weathered pine slats and patched canvas. Chickens picked at dry earth. Her hair was bound in a simple knot, streaks of white catching in the sun like hoarfrost in early morning grass. He didn't expect someone young. He didn't expect the way her eyes met his with that flat kind of stillness that reminded him of his own. "I'm not looking to remarry," she said. Without turning from the iron pot she stirred. "I'm not asking." She looked over then, really looked. Her gaze was as clean and cold as creek water. "You got a room. Above the kitchen. Wages. Fair." She dipped her head once. "I'll come Sunday." He rode back under a sky bruised with twilight, wondering what it was about her that had stayed in his chest like a bird beating wings against a closed door. Her name was Clara Bell. On her first morning she arrived with a carpetbag and a pan wrapped in burlap. Said nothing more than a greeting. The hands gave her space. They were used to noise. The last cook sang hymns while frying bacon, but Clara moved like dusk, quiet and unassuming, and before long the bunkhouse was full of smells that made even the hardest men soften at the eyes. She scrubbed every inch of the kitchen before she cooked in it. Jonas watched from the doorframe, sipping coffee she'd already made better. She didn't ask about the scorch marks on the far wall, just scraped them clean until her knuckles bled, then wrapped her hand without complaint. She served meals with care but no fuss, warm bread with thyme butter, rabbit stew that didn't taste like shoe leather, pies with crusts that flaked like old snow. The men took to her quickly, though none dared flirt. There was something about Clara that closed those doors before they opened, not cold, just unreachable, like a star behind winter clouds. Jonas thought about that sometimes, sitting by the stove after everyone else had gone to bed. She'd often still be there, hands in dough or soaking pans, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She had scars on both forearms, old ones, he never asked. One evening, 2 weeks into her stay, a hand named Elijah came in with a split brow, blood trailing into his beard. Thrown by a horse. Clara didn't blink. She sat him down, boiled water, and stitched the cut herself. Steady hands. She didn't flinch when he cursed or wince when he flailed. Just pressed his shoulder firm with one hand and worked with the other. After, she said, "You bite your tongue next time or I'll do it for you." He laughed through the pain. Jonas watched all this from the corner, arms folded, something unfamiliar moving in his chest. It wasn't desire, or not only that, it was something older, something like recognition. That night he caught her staring into the fire with a far-off look. He asked if she'd ever stitched a man before. She nodded once. He didn't press. In the days that followed, little things changed. She mended shirts and patched worn boots without being asked. She taught the stable boy how to salt meat properly. The old hound that used to growl at everyone now followed her around like he was leashed to her skirts. Even the horses, nervous and high-strung from the coming cold, settled under her hand. It was as if her presence stitched together not just the meals, but the frayed edges of the whole place. Jonas found himself lingering in the kitchen more often, bringing small things to fix, a spur strap, a broken belt, once even a snapped watch chain. He told himself it was practical. She had nimble fingers. But when she sat across from him one evening, brushing a strand of hair from her brow and saying, "You look like a man who's been through fire," he felt the air shift. He looked at her then, really looked, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened, the threadbare ribbon she used to tie her apron, the ring she didn't wear, though her hand bore the pale ghost of one. He didn't answer her, not then. Outside, the wind had turned sharp. Snow would fall soon. But inside, something was starting to thaw. November arrived with a whisper and a bite. Mornings came cloaked in frost, the sun rising slow and low, casting long shadows across the yard where cattle huddled near the fences, breath steaming like ghosts. Clara woke before the light, always moving, always quiet, but not unseen. The men started calling the kitchen, the heart, without thinking. It was where wounds got cleaned and hands were warmed, where a man could find a square meal, yes, but also a moment of peace. Clara didn't talk much, but her silence was generous. She let them come and go, let them sit with their heavy thoughts and frozen fingers, and offered warmth without asking what they'd done to deserve it. Jonas noticed how the men straightened when she passed, not out of fear, out of respect, the kind that couldn't be demanded, only earned. One morning he found her outside splitting kindling. He moved to take the axe from her, but she stopped him with a look. "I've done this before." "I don't doubt it," he said, stepping back, hands in his coat pockets. She swung the axe clean and true, her breath puffing in steady rhythm. Snowflakes began to fall around them, soft as sifted flour. Jonas studied her face, the set of her jaw, the way she worked like a woman trying to forget something by keeping busy. "You were married," he said, not as a question. She didn't pause, just laid another log across the stump. "I was." He waited, but that was all she offered. That evening a blizzard rolled in without warning. The wind howled like it had teeth. The bunkhouse chimney smoked wrong, forcing half the men to bed down in the hayloft. Jonas stayed up late checking rafters and making sure everything was shut tight. When he finally came in, Clara was still in the kitchen, tying cloths around the windows to keep the cold from creeping through. "You ought to sleep," he said, shrugging off his coat. "You too." They stood across from each other, both tired, both worn in the way people get when they've lost more than they talk about. The fire popped in the stove. "I keep busy because if I stop, it catches up," she said after a while, voice low. He nodded slowly. "I know the feeling." She looked at him then, softer than before. "I buried a child 3 winters ago." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was sacred. "I buried 2 brothers," he said. "Same year, one to the war, the other to whiskey." Clara nodded like she understood, and he believed she did. They didn't speak again that night, but something had passed between them, a bridge built from quiet and pain and the simple fact of still being alive. By December they had a rhythm. Clara cooked and mended and listened. Jonas kept the place running, but he checked in more often, sometimes under the pretense of work, sometimes not. He noticed when her cough lingered in the mornings and made sure she had a second blanket. She noticed when he limped more than usual and soaked his knee with herbs she boiled herself. No declarations, no promises. Just presence. One bitter morning, they found the stable boy, Thomas, curled up in the tack room, crying into his arms. The letter from back east was crumpled beside him. His mother had passed, and there was no money to go home. Jonas stood back, unsure, but Clara knelt beside the boy and gathered him against her shoulder like he was her own. He wept into her apron while she stroked his hair, murmuring things too soft to hear. Later, Jonas found her sitting alone by the stove, staring into the fire with that far-off look again. "I had a boy," she said. "Just turned 9. Fever took him in a week. He was sweet, always trying to fix broken things." Jonas sat across from her. "And your husband? He wasn't the kind you miss." Jonas didn't ask more. He simply sat with her, hands wrapped around his cup, sharing the silence. Christmas came without much ceremony. Clara baked what she could with what they had: molasses cookies, dried apple pie, biscuits shaped into stars. The men brought her little things: a ribbon, a polished stone, a hand-carved spoon. None of them knew what to say, but she accepted each gift like it was gold. Jonas gave her a journal with a leather cover. "Thought maybe you'd write things down," he said. She touched the cover gently, ran her fingers over the stitching. "Thank you." That night he heard her humming for the first time. A low tune, old and mournful, but steady. She sang while she cleaned, while snow piled at the window and the fire cast flickering shadows across the room. It was the sound of someone not healed, but healing. By January, the ranch was different, not fixed, but mending. And Jonas, who hadn't known he'd been waiting for anything, began to wonder what it meant to stay. Winter deepened, settled thick over Elkhorn like a quilt laid by a weary hand. Days bled into one another under the hush of snowdrifts and sky. At the Half Moon Ranch, the work slowed but never stopped. Feed had to be hauled, ice chopped, injuries watched for. And in the kitchen, Clara Bell kept the world turning. Jonas watched her more than he meant to. Not in the way a man watches a woman he wants, though he did, in quiet and restrained ways, but like watching the first light in a long, dark room. She made things better, and he couldn't say how or why exactly. It was the way she remembered which man liked vinegar on his greens and which one didn't. The way she left out a bowl of warm water for the ranch dog when the frost was too sharp. The way she fixed a jammed window latch with a nail, a coin, and a steady hand. He tried not to linger, but he did. One afternoon, Clara fell. She was climbing the root cellar steps with a sack of potatoes when the wood gave under her boot. Jonas heard the crash from across the yard. He found her at the bottom, clutching her ankle, jaw set like stone. "Don't touch me," she said, teeth clenched. "You're not walking on that," he answered, and scooped her up without another word. She tensed at first, then went quiet, arms around his neck like she wasn't sure whether to hold tight or vanish altogether. He carried her to the main house, where the fire burned hot and the floorboards didn't creak, set her down gently on the settee and brought blankets, bandages, and boiled water. Her ankle was already swelling. "I'll wrap it," she said. "I know," he replied, and handed her the linen. She worked quickly, face tight, not from pain but from pride. Jonas sat nearby, watching the snow thicken against the windows. "You'll need to stay off it." "For how long?" "Long enough." She sighed and leaned back, exhausted. "I don't like being still." "I know." He didn't leave her alone, not that day. He brought in her chair from the kitchen and a stack of books from the shelf, old ones, with brittle pages and names penciled on the inside cover. She ran her fingers over the words like they were relics from another life. Later that evening he made the stew. Badly, oversalted and half-burned, but she ate it anyway, lips quirking at the edge. "I see you're a better rancher than cook," she said. He raised his mug to knowing one's place. For 3 days she stayed off her feet, and the house grew quieter, softer. Jonas brought her the morning mail, small jars of preserved peaches, and once, a pair of wool socks that he'd never worn but had kept tucked in a drawer for years. She accepted them with a nod, but he saw the way her fingers lingered at the cuffs. On the 4th day, the fever came. It started with a shiver, then a cough. By evening, her skin burned hot under his hand. Jonas didn't panic, but something close to it tugged at him as he sat by her side, changing cloths, brewing tea with whatever herbs she had tucked in jars above the stove. She murmured in her sleep, names he didn't recognize, sometimes cries that cut deep, not loud, but wounded. Once she gripped his arm so hard her nails left marks. "I'm here," he whispered again and again. "You're safe, I'm here." When the fever broke, she slept through the next day like a child worn from weeping. The ranch hands took over the kitchen as best they could. Meals were rough, but no one complained. Jonas stayed near Clara, reading from the old books even when he didn't know if she heard. She woke slowly, on a morning pale with sun, and reached for the cup he offered her like she'd done it 100 times. "I dreamed I was back there," she said, voice raw. "Back where?" "In the house, after the baby, when it was just me and the cold." Jonas didn't speak. He waited. "I thought maybe no one would come," she said, "and maybe I deserved that." He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his. "You didn't." Clara looked down at their hands, then out the window where frost clung to the glass like lace. "I don't know how to be held anymore." "Then just be," he said. From then on, she leaned when she needed to, not much, but enough. When she could stand again, she moved slower, but with more care. Let others help where she wouldn't before. The boy Thomas started bringing her firewood without being asked. One of the older men built a bench outside the door so she could sit in the sun on clear days. In late February, they found a fox caught in one of the snares near the tree line. Its leg was mangled. Jonas meant to put it down quick, but Clara asked him to wait. "It's still breathing," she said, kneeling beside the frightened animal. Jonas frowned. "It won't last long." She met his eyes. "Still, let's try." She stayed up all night tending it, made a little bed near the stove, fed it bits of rabbit soaked in broth, and against all odds the fox lived, lame in one leg but alive. She named it Red. Jonas watched the way her hand moved over its fur, the way she murmured to it without shame. The kitchen became a haven, not just for the men, but for anything broken that still had fight left in it. And Jonas, who had never needed more than a fire and a roof, began to realize he wanted a home. He just didn't yet know how to ask for one. March brought a thaw that came not in warmth, but in sound, the slow drip of melting icicles, the creak of wet snow sliding off barn roofs, the soft groan of earth waking beneath frost-hardened crust. The trees stood bare and wet, their bark dark with moisture, as if mourning the months gone by. The ranch changed with the season. Calving began. The horses needed more work, mud thick in the pastures. The men moved with renewed purpose, shoulders set with spring's burden. Clara moved with them, slower still, her ankle healing in its own stubborn time, but she was back in the kitchen where she belonged. Jonas could tell she breathed easier for it, like motion itself was a balm. She baked more, as though sweetness had something to do with survival. Pies with thick, sugared crusts, golden cornbread slathered with molasses butter, warm biscuits filled with jam that tasted of a summer not yet come. The men called it a gift. Jonas called it a sign. She was softening, not in strength but in defense. Her smiles didn't vanish as quick. She let the fox curl at her feet as she read, and once Jonas caught her singing again, a different song this time gentler, with a lilt like morning light. One evening in late March, Clara found Jonas out by the fence line, mending a loose rail. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the cold had come back sudden and sharp. She had her shawl wrapped tight, a scarf at her throat. "You missed supper," she said. He looked up, brow damp with effort. "Wasn't hungry." "You lie worse than you cook." He leaned on the fence post and gave a slow grin. "That bad, huh?" She didn't smile, but her eyes held warmth. "Worse." She stepped closer then, careful not to twist her ankle in the uneven ground. For a moment they just stood there, the wind catching her scarf, the sky bruised with the last light of day. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. He blinked. "Elkhorn. This life." Jonas turned back toward the horizon, where the hills softened into dusk. "Used to, after my brothers died, I didn't see much point in staying put. And now? Now I think, maybe the place isn't what matters, maybe it's who you share it with." Clara didn't reply, but he felt the weight of her gaze, heard the unspoken things moving between them like the wind. She turned to go. "I saved you a plate." He watched her walk back toward the house, the lantern glow spilling from the windows, and he felt something settle in his chest, not a longing, but a knowing. In early April, a rider came up from the south, an old friend of one of the ranch hands. Word traveled with him, like it always did, faster than reason and heavier than truth. He carried newspapers, letters, and gossip bundled in his saddlebags. Over supper, he mentioned a name. Reuben Harland. Clara dropped her fork. Jonas caught the flicker in her face. Not fear, not quite, but something close. "Who is he?" Jonas asked, later, in the quiet of the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate. "My husband." Jonas felt something cold run through him. "You said." "I said I wasn't the kind to miss." "He's alive." "I thought he was." The room filled with a silence neither of them had known before. Not comfort, not grace. "He hurt you." She nodded, eyes cast down. Jonas stepped closer. "Did he ever come here, find you?" "No, not yet." He didn't ask more, didn't need to. But that night he didn't sleep. Sat by the window with his rifle across his lap, listening to the wind and the soft scuff of Red's paws on the floorboards. The days stretched longer, work picked up, but something had shifted in the air. Jonas posted one of the hands on lookout, wrote a letter to the sheriff in Casper. He told Clara nothing of it. She cooked still, sat in the sun with her journal, but he saw the way she glanced toward the road when hooves approached, the way her hand hovered near the knife drawer without thinking. Then one morning, just as the sky bruised pale, a stranger rode into the yard. Tall, dust-streaked, a smirk beneath a crooked hat, his horse lathered and mean. He dismounted like a man who'd owned every place he ever walked into. Clara was in the yard, feeding the chickens. She went still. So did Jonas, stepping out from the barn with a calm he did not feel. "Clara," the man drawled, "been a long time." She said nothing. Jonas moved beside her. "You've got no place here." The man looked him over. "And you are the man between you and anything that walks away from this ranch." The stranger laughed. "That right." Clara spoke then. "Reuben, leave. You can't bully ghosts, and I'm not your wife." Reuben's smile faded. "You belong to me." "I never did." Jonas saw the twitch in Reuben's hand, just a flick, but it was enough. In the next breath, everything moved. Jonas stepped forward. Reuben reached for his belt. The crack of a rifle rang out, not from Jonas. From the porch, where Thomas stood, shaking but steady, the smoking barrel of Jonas's Winchester braced against his shoulder. Reuben staggered back, clutching his side. "You'll want to ride out while you can," Jonas said. And he did. Blood trailing in the snow, curses in the wind, Reuben Harlan rode out of Elkhorn and didn't look back. That night Clara stood in the kitchen, hands braced on the counter. "I was 16 when I married him," she said. "Didn't know what love looked like, just knew what fear felt like." Jonas reached out, but didn't touch. "I ain't broken," she said, "but some things in me are still cracked." "Then let them be." She looked up. "Why?" "Because the light still gets in." They stood like that for a long time, the fire warming the floor, the shadows soft, the kitchen quiet. Then, gently, she stepped forward and leaned her forehead against his chest. And for the first time in years, she let herself rest. The snow melted slow that spring, reluctant and stubborn like grief easing out of old bones. Where the drifts gave way, green pushed through, shy blades of grass, early crocus, the silver sheen of willow buds waking along the creek. The air still carried the edge of frost at dawn, but by mid-morning the world smelled like thawed earth and coming life. At the half-moon ranch, the rhythms returned, steady as breath. Fences were mended, calves branded, tack cleaned and oiled beneath the warming sun. The bunkhouse rang again with laughter, rough and low. Clara moved easier now, the limp in her ankle nearly gone, and her sleeves rolled to the elbow like always, revealing the map of her old scars with no apology. Jonas found himself waking before the bell, just to sit on the porch with coffee and watch the light slide across the pasture. Some mornings she joined him, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, hair still damp from washing. They didn't always speak, didn't need to. Her presence had become a rhythm of its own. She still sang sometimes, more often now, low tunes that came from somewhere deep, songs without names or words even, just sound that filled the kitchen like warmth. One afternoon, Clara and Jonas rode out together. He said it was to check the south fence, but he brought a blanket and a tin of cold biscuits and a jar of blackberry preserves she'd put up last summer. They stopped by the creek, where the water ran clear again, chattering over stones like it had stories to tell. She sat with her boots off, toes in the water. He lay back in the grass, hat over his eyes. "Why this place?" she asked. He opened one eye. "The ranch. This life, all this." He thought for a long time. "Because it's quiet enough to hear yourself think, and hard enough that you have to mean what you do." She nodded slowly. "I like it here." Jonas sat up. "You can stay." Her brows knit. "I thought I already was." He shook his head. "I don't mean for now. I mean as long as you want, not just as cook, not because you're good with the men or because the place needs a woman, because I want you here, as you are." She watched him for a long while, the wind stirring her skirt, the sun warm on her cheek. "I never wanted to belong to someone again," she said, voice quiet, "but I wouldn't mind belonging with someone." He didn't touch her, didn't press, just waited. She reached over, laid her hand over his. And that was enough. The wedding was not a wedding, not by town standards. No church, no flowers, no white dress, just a gathering in the barn with warm cider, fresh bread, fiddle music, and laughter that rose like birds at dusk. The men shaved, the stable boy wore shoes, even the fox sat proud beside Clara's feet like he knew what the day meant. She wore a blue ribbon in her hair. Jonas had never seen her look so calm. They didn't say vows, just stood before those gathered and looked at each other like everything that needed saying had already been lived. After, when the lanterns burned low and the men drifted off into the dark, Clara and Jonas sat on the porch. The moon was high, the sky soft with stars. "I never thought I'd get to start over," she said. He took her hand. "This ain't starting over, it's starting from where we are." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "That's better." Years passed, the ranch grew slowly and with effort. Hands came and went. The boy Thomas stayed on, learned the ropes, took over the spring drive when Jonas's leg began acting up again. Clara kept the kitchen and everything else running like clockwork. She raised chickens, kept bees, grew herbs along the fence where she could reach them easily. She taught young women who passed through how to make sourdough and how to mend with patience, not just cloth, but hearts. They never had children of their own, but the house was never empty. Strays came in all forms, horses, dogs, folks down on their luck. Some stayed a week, some a season. All of them left better. Jonas and Clara never traveled far, never needed to. The ranch was enough. The work was steady, the days long and honest, the nights warm with shared breath and quiet understanding. She never asked him to change. He never asked her to forget. Their love was not made of grand gestures or declarations. It was made of chores done side by side, of coffee left hot, of letters read aloud, of hands held across the porch railing as the sky turned gold. And in that quiet place, where fire had once taken and sorrow had once lived, they built something neither of them had dared believe in. Home.